On a rainy night, a failed businessman wanders into a small roadside diner, his spirit drained after a devastating business deal. He expects nothing, just a hot meal and a quiet place to fall apart. But the diner's owner, a tough yet kind-hearted black woman, sees something in him. As she shares her own story of struggle and survival, he realizes he's not just eating soup. He's being given a powerful push toward life, and this diner is a place where second chances are served, whether he's ready or not. The rain drizzled steadily outside, tapping against the glass windows of the small roadside diner. The golden glow from inside contrasted with the gray, somber night beyond. The neon sign above flickered weakly, its letters half dimmed from years of wear. Inside, the place was quiet, nearly empty, except for the hum of the overhead lights and the soft clatter of a spoon against ceramic as Marianne stirred a pot of soup behind the counter. She was a sturdy woman, full-bodied, with short, tightly coiled hair, her features lined with the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen both the best and worst in people. The apron she wore was faded but clean, neatly tied at the waist as she methodically wiped down the counter. The door swung open and the wind carried in the scent of damp pavement along with a lone figure. David stepped in hesitantly, his shoulders hunched against the cold, the weight of the world seemingly pressing him down. He wore a suit that had once been sharp, now crumpled and stained with the remnants of a long day, maybe even a long month. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and there was something distant, hollow in his gaze as he scanned the room. When his eyes met Marianne's, they flickered away just as quickly, as if he was looking at something he had no energy to acknowledge. He didn't ask for a menu. He barely looked at the counter as he shuffled toward a booth in the farthest corner. Sitting heavily, he ran a hand down his face, exhaling deeply. Marianne watched him from behind the counter, her instinct sharp. She had seen that look before, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just a lack of sleep. It was a kind of defeat, the kind that didn't just weigh on the body but crushed something inside a man. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and approached his table, offering a small, knowing smile. "Rough night?" David barely lifted his head. His voice was quiet, almost hoarse. "Just anything hot." Marianne didn't press him. She nodded, turning back to the kitchen and ladling a generous serving of soup into a bowl. The steam curled upwards, filling the air with the scent of slow-cooked vegetables and seasoned broth. When she returned, she placed it in front of him with a quiet care. David stared at the bowl for a long moment before finally picking up the spoon. The first sip seemed to thaw something in him. He hadn't realized how hungry he was, how cold he'd been until that moment. He ate slowly at first, then more steadily, as if each bite reminded him of something he had forgotten. Warmth, comfort, the simple act of being taken care of. Marianne leaned against the booth across from him, not intruding but making her presence clear. "You look like someone who could use a conversation," she said lightly. "And I'm pretty good at listening." David hesitated, his grip on the spoon tightening. His instincts told him not to talk, not to share, especially not to a woman like her. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because people like her were supposed to be invisible to men like him. He had grown up in places where women like Marianne only existed behind counters, clearing plates, filling cups, never asking questions. But something about her was different. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with pity but with a patience he hadn't encountered in a long time. He swallowed the last bite of soup, setting the spoon down carefully, as if gathering his thoughts. "I lost everything today," he finally admitted, his voice flat. "Big contract, the kind that keeps a company from sinking. And now?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just waiting for the water to close over me." Marianne studied him. His words were sharp, but they weren't full of anger. Just emptiness. She had met men like him before. Men who thought their world would never crack until they found themselves standing in its ruins. "You ever thought maybe this isn't the end?" she asked simply. David gave a tired, humorless chuckle. "People like me don't get second chances." Marianne tilted her head slightly. "People like you?" David hesitated again. He wasn't sure why he had said it like that, but there was something about her tone that made him feel exposed, like she saw right through the carefully constructed walls he didn't even know he had built. He cleared his throat. I mean, in my world, you screw up this badly, you don't just get to start over. Marianne nodded slowly, as if she understood something he didn't. She let the silence settle between them before she finally spoke. Funny, she said, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. People like me have been starting over our whole lives. Marianne's words hung in the air between them, quiet but unshakable. David stared at her, something shifting in his expression, an almost imperceptible crack in the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. He wasn't sure what he had expected from this woman, but it certainly wasn't this. She wasn't indulging him, wasn't offering empty reassurances or sympathizing for the sake of it. She spoke with the weight of someone who had lived it, who had rebuilt from nothing, not just once, but over and over. David exhaled slowly, leaning back against the worn vinyl seat of the booth. So, what? You're saying I should just pick myself up and keep going? Pretend like today didn't happen? His voice was laced with something bitter, something tired. Marianne shook her head. I'm saying it happened, and now you decide what comes next. David scoffed lightly, looking down at his empty bowl, the last remnants of warmth fading at the edges. That's easy to say when you're not the one losing everything. Marianne's expression didn't change. If anything, her eyes deepened, as if she was looking at something far beyond him, something distant yet familiar. You think I've never lost everything? David didn't respond, but the way he held himself, the slight shift of his posture, made it clear he had assumed exactly that. Marianne saw it for what it was, not intentional cruelty, but the quiet, ingrained belief that struggle looked different on people like her. She folded her hands together on the table, her fingers calloused from years of work. I grew up in a house where dinner wasn't a guarantee. My mama scrubbed floors for white folks who never bothered to learn her name, and my daddy— She hesitated just a fraction of a second before continuing. He left before I was old enough to remember his face. I worked my first job at 13, second job at 15. By 20 I had 2 mouths to feed that weren't mine. By 30 I was lucky if I had enough left over to keep the lights on. She let out a dry chuckle, shaking her head slightly. And you know what the worst part was? David didn't answer, but his eyes were locked onto hers now, the bitterness in him quieter, something else creeping in. Marianne leaned in just slightly, her voice lower, steady. Nobody ever expected me to make it, not really. The world don't hand out second chances to people like me, but I took one anyway. David felt something tighten in his chest, something he didn't quite have words for. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it wasn't the same, that he had spent years building something from the ground up, only to watch it crumble in a single afternoon. That he wasn't some entitled rich kid who didn't understand loss. But the words didn't come, because deep down he knew that wasn't really what this was about. Marianne leaned back again, giving him space. I built this place because I wanted something that was mine, a place where people could sit down and feel human, even if just for a little while. She gestured toward the diner around them, at the worn but clean booths, the carefully placed decorations, the soft hum of the old radio playing a song from another time. It ain't much, but it's still standing. And so am I. David swallowed, looking away for a moment, his jaw tightening. He thought of the boardroom today, the cold indifference of the people who had once shaken his hand and called him promising. He thought of the silent, crushing weight of failure, the knowledge that tomorrow the same world that had once praised him would write him off as another statistic, another man who had almost made it. Marianne must have seen it in his face because she nodded slightly. Failure don't make you less of a man, honey, but letting it keep you down might. David let out a slow, measured breath. He wasn't sure if it was the soup, the warmth of the place, or simply the way Marianne spoke like she had already lived through every storm he thought would break him. But for the first time that day, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet, but before he could slide a bill onto the table, Marianne gently pushed it back toward him. "This one's on me," she said simply. David hesitated. "I can pay." Marianne smiled, but there was no argument in her eyes, just certainty. I know, but sometimes a hot meal given freely does more for a man than one he buys himself. David stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding, slipping his wallet back into his pocket. He didn't say thank you, not yet. Not because he didn't feel it, but because he wasn't sure how to say it in a way that would mean enough. Instead, he met her gaze, really met it for the first time since he had walked in. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted, the words feeling heavier than he expected. Marianne just nodded, as if she had already known. "You'll figure it out." David didn't know why, but for the first time all day he almost believed it. As David sat there, his gaze momentarily drifted away from Marianne and toward a small group of people sitting a few booths away. Their voices were low but carried through the quiet diner. "She still goes to the orphanage every week," one of them said, stirring a cup of coffee. "Brings those kids fresh bread, cookies, whatever she can manage, never misses a week." "Yeah," another agreed, shaking their head with something between admiration and disbelief. "Just yesterday I saw her hand a full meal to that old man who sleeps by the laundromat. Didn't even let him thank her, just said, 'Eat up, honey,' and walked away like it was nothing." David's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. He hadn't meant to listen, but the words settled in his mind, reshaping the way he looked at the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't just some kind diner owner offering a free meal to a stranger. She was someone who had built her life around giving, even when she had little to give. Someone who, despite everything the world had likely thrown at her, still chose kindness over bitterness. When his eyes met Marianne's again, something had shifted. He wasn't looking at her the way he had before, as just another face behind a counter, as someone separate from his world. Now, he saw her for what she was. Someone who understood loss and struggle in a way he never had, yet still found a way to keep standing. Someone who had every reason to give up, but never did. Marianne saw the change in his expression and smiled knowingly. "Like I said," she murmured, "you decide what comes next." David exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's not that simple," he muttered. Marianne tilted her head slightly. "Isn't it?" He looked at her, unsure how to respond. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "Listen, honey, sometimes life throws things at us that we never asked for, things we don't deserve, but what we do with that? That's on us." She let a beat of silence pass, making sure he was really listening. "You can sit in this booth and tell yourself this is the end, or you can decide it's just a chapter." David swallowed, something tight forming in his chest. She wasn't telling him anything revolutionary. She wasn't offering magic words to erase his failure, but somehow, hearing it from her, someone who had lost more than he ever had and still kept going, made it impossible to ignore. "You can fail," she said, her voice steady, "but that doesn't define you. The way you get back up, that's what does." David held her gaze, and for the first time all day, the weight pressing down on him didn't feel quite as unbearable. 2 years passed. The world kept moving, the way it always did. David rebuilt piece by piece, failure by failure, until the weight of that night in the diner became less of a burden and more of a lesson. The business he thought had sunk clawed its way back, stronger, leaner, battle-worn. He made smarter choices, learned from his mistakes, and slowly he became the man he had once imagined himself to be. And yet, something about that night never left him. That diner, that woman. Marianne's words had dug into him, settled in places he hadn't even known were empty. He had told himself, once he had made it, really made it, he would go back. Maybe to say thank you. Maybe just to see if the world had been as kind to her as she had been to him. So one evening he found himself standing outside that same small diner, looking up at the neon sign flickering against the dusky sky. The place hadn't changed. The same warm glow spilled from the windows, the same quiet hum of life within. But as he pushed open the door, a strange sense of unease prickled at him. Something felt different. Marianne was there, of course, moving behind the counter with that same quiet efficiency, her apron tied just as neatly as before. But the place was emptier than he remembered. The warmth was still there, but beneath it something else. Something heavier. He took a step forward, waiting for her to recognize him. She didn't. Her eyes flickered over him with the polite but distant recognition she likely gave every new customer. "Evenin', honey. Take a seat wherever you'd like." David hesitated, something twisting in his chest. She didn't remember him. Of course, she didn't. How many people had she given a free meal to? How many lost souls had walked in here, broken and hopeless, only to be met with her quiet kindness? He had spent 2 years carrying the memory of that night, of her words, but to her he had been just another weary face. He cleared his throat, forcing a small smile. "It's been a while," he said, sliding into a booth. Marianne gave him a curious look, but it was clear she still hadn't placed him. "That's so." She poured him a cup of coffee without asking, just like she had before. "You from around here?" David let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "No, but I was here once before, 2 years ago." She paused slightly, considering. 2 years, huh? That's a long time." He nodded, watching her carefully. "I was in bad shape back then. Thought I lost everything. You gave me soup and told me failure didn't define me." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Didn't let me pay either." Something flickered in her eyes then, the first crack of recognition. Her head tilted slightly, studying him the way one studies a familiar melody but can't quite place the lyrics. Then slowly the memory settled. "Well, I'll be damned," she murmured, a small chuckle escaping her. "You were the one sittin' right there." She gestured to the farthest booth, the very same one he had collapsed into that night. David nodded. "That was me." Marianne let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Well, look at you. You sure don't look like a man who lost everything no more." David glanced down at himself. The tailored suit, the polished shoes, the watch that gleamed under the diner lights. 2 years ago he had walked in here looking like the world had beaten the life out of him. Tonight he looked like someone who had won. But then Marianne's face shifted. The warmth remained, but there was something else now, something more tired than before. "How's business?" he asked, almost hesitant. Marianne exhaled slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's hanging on," she admitted, her voice quieter than before. "Times are tough. Rent's gone up, prices are higher, folks ain't eating out like they used to." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Might have to close up shop soon." David felt a weight settle in his chest. This place, this woman, the idea of it disappearing felt wrong, unnatural. "You can't close," he said, too quickly, too firmly. "This place, it matters." Marianne chuckled softly. "Matters don't pay the bills, honey." David hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, his voice lower. "Let me help." Marianne stiffened slightly, her smile fading. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," David said firmly. "It's an investment. In a place that changes people. In a woman who changed me." Marianne looked at him carefully, as if weighing his words, searching for any sign of pity, any hint that he saw her as someone who needed saving, but all she found was sincerity. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "You sure?" David smiled. Yeah, I'm sure." Marian didn't answer right away. She just stood there, studying him, arms crossed over her chest, her fingers idly gripping the edge of her apron. David could see the hesitation flickering behind her eyes, the years of self-reliance making it hard for her to accept what he was offering. He understood, he really did. But he wasn't backing down. A silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then finally Marianne let out a slow breath, shaking her head with a soft chuckle. "Lord, I don't know what I did to make you think this little diner is worth all that fuss." David smiled, but there was something firm behind it. "You fed a broken man and told him he wasn't finished yet." His voice was steady, unwavering. "Turns out, you were right." Marianne held his gaze for a long moment, then exhaled, shaking her head as she muttered, "Well, hell." And that was that. Over the next few months, the little diner transformed. David didn't throw money at it blindly, didn't try to make it something it wasn't. He simply helped. A fresh coat of paint, a refinished counter, new chairs to replace the ones that had wobbled for years. He hired someone to update the old flickering neon sign, making sure it still had that same warm glow Marianne loved. He helped her set up an online menu, introduced her to a few people who knew how to spread the word. But through it all, he never touched what mattered most. The food stayed the same, soulful, rich, made with hands that knew how to heal. The atmosphere, the way Marianne treated every person who walked through the door, that stayed untouched. And little by little the customers came back. Some were new, drawn in by the word of mouth David had helped generate. Others were old, familiar faces, people who had drifted away over time but found their way back, as if some part of them always knew this place was home. One evening, as the diner hummed with the quiet sounds of silverware clinking against plates and low, familiar conversation, David sat at his usual booth, watching it all. The place was full, busier than he had ever seen it. Marianne moved between tables with that same steady presence, that same warmth that had first stopped him in his tracks years ago. She finally made her way over, setting down a plate in front of him without asking if he wanted anything. "On the house," she said, giving him a pointed look before he could protest. David smirked, picking up his fork. "That's a dangerous precedent, you know. A businessman like me could take advantage." Marianne rolled her eyes, but there was something softer in them now, something lighter. She glanced around at the packed diner, at the familiar faces, at the life that had settled back into these walls. Then she looked at David, her voice quieter. "I meant what I said that night, you know." David raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" Marianne leaned against the table slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "The way you get back up. That's what defines you." David set his fork down, looking at her, really looking at her. Then he nodded once. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know." A beat passed between them, filled with something unspoken but understood. Then Marianne straightened, dusting her hands off on her apron. "Now eat your damn food before it gets cold." David chuckled, shaking his head as he picked up his fork again. Outside, the neon sign flickered steadily in the night, casting its warm glow over the sidewalk, over the people who passed by, over the ones who would eventually find their way inside. And the little diner remained, standing strong, just like the woman who had built it. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.